So this talk was a conference talk. I've given it in a couple of different formats. So the idea behind it, usually I explain the idea behind it as part of the talk. But I'm not going to give you the conference version of the talk because this isn't that audience really. So I gave a version of this to some Iron Yard students once when that was a thing. And I've given it in this class before. But it was a conference talk about sort of the path from a junior developer to a senior developer. And I've given it to audiences that were primarily composed of junior developers or even boot campers. And then I've given it to audiences where everyone already considered themselves a senior developer, in which case the point was sort of geared toward how to help others on your team grow. Because I think a lot of companies that hire junior developers have no idea how to give them the resources they need to grow. So that's kind of what the talk is about. But to understand that, we need to kind of know what senior developers even are. So most of the people who hear this don't necessarily know who I am already. So I am still this person. And by the way, D-Struce on Twitter, fair warning. It's a lot of like Star Wars and socialism as opposed to code. But if you're into that kind of thing, there we go. Davey at fretless.com, that's me. Dana at fretless.com, predictably enough. Her, back there in the back.
What do you do with your elbow?
I don't know. The what on earth?
Because it's like above your arm. Oh, okay.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a wide-angle lens right in my face. We'll come back to this picture, though, later. It's part of story time. Okay. So anyway, we're here to talk about senior developers. They're a serious threat, but with some careful planning, you can learn how to protect yourself and your loved ones. Maybe even learn how to destroy them. So first, I want to start by clearing up a few myths, a few misconceptions. First of all, senior developers don't rule the night. They don't rule it. Nobody does. And secondly, you can't get turned into a senior developer by getting bitten by a senior developer. That is superstitious nonsense. That's only in movies. Okay, that's not really what the talk's about. But it is about how to become a senior developer, and it is not through bites. But first, it's through gigabytes. Yeah. Boy, it's rare that I do a pun on accident. I spend so much of my life doing them on purpose. So before we talk about how to become a senior developer, it's good to define it. And this is a surprisingly controversial topic, or maybe it's not surprising because literally everything is controversial now. And two people cannot agree on a single thing. When I gave this at a conference about a month and a half ago, well, now I've been doing this for over a month. About a month and a half ago, I gave this talk again. And I'm always kind of keeping my eye on Twitter because I hate myself, and also because I want to see what people are saying about topics like this, to kind of see where the conversation's going. And it just so happens that 2 days before I gave the talk last, someone posted their list of traits that they think a senior developer ought to have. Not too different from the recent meme, the most successful people I know. I don't know if you saw that meme that was going around the last 5 days or so. It blew up and fizzled out really quickly. So this guy posted this list of, and of course it was a dude, a list of the traits that he thought a senior developer ought to have. And instant Twitter fight. People jumped on him the second that thing hit, and it got so brutal. It wasn't a great list, but there are a lot of opinions about this thing. So despite the volatility, I'm going to attempt my own definition here. The most obvious trait of a senior developer is probably technical capability, right? Different people define senior developer differently, but I think everyone agrees that developers need to learn the tech. But once you've identified this as an area in which you need to grow, how do you even make a plan to address that? And what is technical capability anyway? Does it just mean memorizing all the APIs and knowing all the languages? I don't think so. So more about what I think technical capability means in about 10 minutes. But first, I want to tell you about Tony DeWan's scale of awesomeness. Tony is a local developer who also teaches web design, or at least he used to teach web design at the college level too, from time to time. And he developed this scale for his students to understand how they would be graded in his class. But I think it's also a really good general purpose tool for measuring the quality of a developer's work. So that's the scale, and that's Tony. So does it work? Does it work well? Could it work better? Could it work elsewhere? Let's break it down. First on scale, does it work? Does it meet the functional requirements? Great. Tony says, you'll probably pass this class. Outside of a classroom, you probably won't get fired. But what do we think of someone who only does the bare minimum? We have higher standards for ourselves, right? So, does it work is the bare minimum. Then we ask, does it work well? Behold the Norman door, named after the inspiration of Don Norman's classic book, The Design of Everyday Things, which I think was originally called The Psychology of Everyday Things. It works. That door will totally open, but that is a poor user experience, right? When you have to write instructions for opening a dang door on the door, you have failed usability. Doors should be self-explanatory. So we want to make sure we're not making the equivalent of the Norman door when we write software. So if you can do this, if you can make it work and make it work well, Tony says you'll probably get a good grade. In the professional world, outside of the classroom, people may like you. Yes, even you. I wasn't looking at anyone in particular. The folks in sales and marketing, maybe even customers, they'll all sing your praises because you've written stuff that makes their jobs easier. Other developers on the team, that's another story. We're not done yet. And remember, the developer whose life you make miserable may be you. A future version of you. I will harp on this point a little more. So the question, does it work? Does it work well? Could it work better? That is, could we even make it work better if we wanted to? Can it be maintained? Can it be refactored? What's refactoring? Who remembers what refactoring is? Yeah.
Breaking down components into smaller pieces.
That is an example of how we refactored, yeah. Breaking components down into smaller pieces, stuff like that. As a general, yeah.
Just rewrite, like not rewriting something but not changing its functionality.
Yeah, rewriting something but not changing the way it actually works, right? Restructuring existing code without changing its behavior. That's refactoring. So that's really hard to do if you can't read the dang code. So can anyone else read it? Can everyone else read it? Code is read a whole lot more than it is written. Every line you write will be written a whole lot more than... Every line you write will be read a lot more than once. So it is really worth the extra time to make readable code. So if you can pull this off, if everyone else can read your code, you'll probably get a job, Tony says. If you already have a job, you'll probably get a raise. But I'll be frank, this poop is difficult. It can take longer to learn to write readable code than it takes you to learn to make stuff that works well. It's a lifelong journey, folks. I've been doing this an embarrassingly long time, and I still find it a challenge sometimes. So we had that sidebar.js in our project. That thing was just nasty and horrible and unreadable, and we just didn't have time to keep plugging away at it. But if this were, if this were code that I were shipping for a client, I would probably take a little extra time and make that thing a little more maintainable. But yeah, that is why we break things down into smaller components a lot of times. Those as individual units, those can be maintained pretty easily. Adding emoji to a message wasn't that bad because we knew right which component to go to, and there were only like 10 lines of JSX in that component when we started, right? So it's worth the effort. Does it work? Does it work well? Could it work better? That is, can it be maintained? And finally, last point on the scale, could it work elsewhere? That is, could it be reused? Oftentimes, the same solution can fit multiple problems with only minor variations. And the ability to write code in that way is really indispensable. So ask, can this be packaged and shared? We use a lot of third-party libraries in our code. Just in this class, we use not only React, but React Router and Rebase and the Firebase tools and Emoji Mart. and Aphrodite. We use all kinds of third-party libraries. And probably the authors of those didn't do it just because writing libraries is fun. They needed to solve that problem for some project. Like whoever wrote Emoji Mart probably needed an emoji picker for whatever project they were working on, but they made the extra effort to make a reusable emoji picker because it probably wasn't even the last time they'll need to do that. Besides the fact that there are lots of other people who need that thing too. About 9 months ago, I was working for a client who wanted to integrate LastPass into their web app. LastPass is a password manager, and they don't have an API. LastPass does not offer an API. But they do have a command line utility. And the back end of this app I was working on was Ruby. So I needed to solve this problem for Ruby. So I did, but I made just a tiny bit of extra effort to make it reusable because they're not the only people in the world who need to integrate LastPass. So I just made a wrapper for the command line utility and turned it into a Ruby gem, which is the Ruby equivalent of node modules. You know, it's a package that can be reused. It's a third-party library. I'm the third party in this case. Someone I work with, Miles, like 12 years ago, we were working on a project where I think it has been maybe 10 years ago, but 10 or 11 years ago, we were working on a project, and our boss had asked us to make a web page with a report on it, and then he wanted to be able to turn that into a PDF. He wanted us to be able to turn it into a PDF without having to do it himself. So we needed to be able to turn web pages into PDFs, basically, because web pages are how we knew how to lay out pages and so on. So again, there was a command line utility to do this called WKHTML to PDF. So I mentioned that to Miles, and then Miles took that and made it work for our app for that report. But that wasn't the last time we were going to be asked to make another report. Once we did that for one thing, he was going to want to do that for everything. So we didn't just make it fit the one use case. So Miles made the extra effort to make this a reusable Ruby gem so that anyone with a Ruby project had a pretty easy way to turn HTML into PDFs. And it has now been downloaded more than 3 million times. And it was just a thing that he wrote for a project we were working on that like 40 people were ever going to use. Actually, one person was going to use it. Only our boss was ever going to print that report. But he took a little extra effort, and now lots of people use it. That's not going to happen every time you do this, but yeah.
I think we should credit people when we use their API or whatnot.
It depends. So sometimes the license actually requires that. That's more true when you use assets and stuff that someone else has created, like graphics. It depends. Usually, if you're crediting people for an API or something, it's because the license actually requires it. Like if you use a certain source for your maps in your app, you might have to have an about page that says, maps from MapQuest or whatever the heck. But not necessarily if you're just using a third-party library to get something done. If it's an open source project, you'll have a place where all of those are listed anyway, like package.json. So yeah, it depends on the license and how essential you think it is to how your thing works. Like if your work is like 90% someone else's work, yeah, you should probably credit them. I've never done this, but it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to, in the README for your projects in the class, to say that this was a project for extern boot camp. So people don't think it's totally original work. But yeah, that's a good point. So if you can pull this off, if you can do this kind of stuff, if you can make stuff that's actually reusable, then Tony says you'll probably get a job, probably the best job. So that's the scale, and that's still Tony, though he shaved the beard. Does it work well? Does it work? Does it work well? Could it work better? Could it work elsewhere? So again, he didn't intend that as a definition of a senior developer, but I think that's actually better than a lot of definitions that I have seen. People who can do all of those things are probably senior developers, because I don't think you can achieve all of that stuff without also hitting some of the other things that I'm going to describe. So I want to look at it from a slightly different angle. There's a company called Frontside that had a blog post a couple years ago called The Conjoined Triangles of Senior Level Development, which is a silly title from a Silicon Valley joke. But it's a really great framework for how they determine seniority, and I love it. So they define it as the intersection of these things: how well a person works independently and leads, how technically capable they are, and how well they connect and contribute to a larger community. How well a person works independently and leads, i.e. leadership. How technically capable they are, i.e. technical capability, and how well they connect and contribute to a larger community, i.e. community. So who likes Venn diagrams? Everybody likes Venn diagrams, right? Here we go. Technical capability, community, leadership. In the center, the mythical senior developer. But each of these three areas has a whole junior to senior track of its own. If this is beginning to sound like a lot of work, good, it is. It's not easy to grow. Let's take a closer look at each one, and maybe we can at least come up with a plan. So we'll start with technical capability, the obvious one. Has lots of APIs memorized, frequently encounters problems that they've solved a million times before, and so they can just start flying through solutions without even thinking about it, right? Can do everything with their eyes closed. That's great for sure, but that front side post had the definition of technical capability that I love. A person with high technical capability is technically curious, tackles problems without giving up, and develops solutions that less experienced folks can use, maintain, and learn from. Is technically curious, tackles problems without giving up, and produces solutions that less experienced folks can use, maintain, and learn from. So this is kind of Tony's scale all in one sentence. This is more about aptitude than experience, right? Obviously, a senior developer needs to have some experience, but that's not news and that's not interesting, and it's difficult to say exactly how much experience you need to be senior. But if you're off the charts in these areas, I bet you're going to get there quickly. If you're technically curious, you'll want to understand how things are done and how to improve your, well, at least it works solutions. Your curiosity just won't let you stop there. You'll want to find out how things could be better, and that will drive you to improve very quickly. You'll go down Tony's scale in no time. If you tackle problems without giving up, you will be your boss's favorite employee. So part of my goal here is not just to define these things, but also to suggest how you can work on this stuff. And this is one of those things that it kind of seems like is innate. Like either you're the kind of person who doesn't give up or you're not. But I believe you can work on this if you analyze your past behavior and notice, I kind of tend to give up a little early on things. I think you can work on that. First, recognize that it's a problem, and then hang out with other people who don't give up, and it may rub off on you a little bit. And if you do it a few times, if you stick with something that you think you're not going to be able to do, and then you do get it done, that is such a rush, it actually becomes kind of addictive. And this is one of the rare good addictions. If you get addicted to succeeding at things, it feels really good. So celebrate your wins along the way. We talked about that in that presentation the very first day of class. When you get a new feature done, celebrate it. Even if that just means like going yay inside yourself. Just take a moment to appreciate the fact that you got something done. And breaking things down, I think, helps with this too. So before we actually had the little emojis display with the numbers next to it, we at least spit out that the thing was added, right? So do incremental steps and notice that you're getting things done along the way, and you can start to form the habit of sticking with things when they seem hard. Some experienced developers pride themselves in producing solutions that are too clever for their own good. It's really not beneficial. They enjoy that no one else can understand their code. And, probably they can't understand their own code a month later. But some people feel like that gives them job security. Like, oh, well, she's the only person who knows how that system works. We can never fire her. Well, that is a terrible way to live. Plus, there's the proverbial getting hit by a bus thing, which maybe in your first year in college you haven't heard that cliche nearly as many times as I have, but that's something that gets thrown a lot. Well, what if so-and-so gets hit by a bus? Then we're screwed. No one can maintain this thing. Don't do that. Don't write unreadable code. You're only hurting yourself. Okay, you're not only hurting yourself, but you're hurting yourself in addition to hurting many other people. Don't do it. Write maintainable code, please. For one thing, it's much harder for you to learn if everyone around you is writing unreadable crap. So show some respect to other people and do the same. Write stuff that people can learn from. Taking the extra time to do that also helps you understand this stuff better, inevitably. So now that we've defined it, the question is, how do I technical capability? So let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a young man with a nearly full head of hair, a sweet spool of blank CDRs, a Palm Pilot, a couple of 40-pound CRT monitors. And this young man knew HTML, CSS. He knew PHP and MySQL. He was ready to just grab the web by the lips and yank as hard as he could. So the World Wide Web was his the taking. So he grew himself some truly regrettable facial hair and found himself a cubicle. And he became the person that a great big 40,000 square foot data center depended on when the printer didn't work. So I have to get that photo off the screen. It's so terrible. So here's the building where all this went down. And one day, this young man was probably resetting someone's password or something when he thought to himself, you know, I could harness the power of PHP and MySQL to keep track of all these requests. So he built himself a little ticket system to keep track of these requests. And if he were the only person who were ever going to use it, that probably would have been fine. But one day, this young man's boss passed by the cubicle, and he saw it. He saw the ticket system. And he said, hey, we could actually use something like that. There was a 24-hour, 24/7, like 365 call center, operations center for this organization. And they were keeping track of all customer requests in text files, plain.txt text files. And this was not that long ago. They just had never taken the time to come up with anything else. And so this young man had just whipped something up in an afternoon that solved that problem better than anything they had. And so just like that, he was coding for a living again. But was the sole developer writing software that only his coworkers would use. So he made the technology decisions, determined the schedule, because no one else had any idea how long stuff should take, and built the stuff all by himself. That's not me. What are you talking about? Okay. It's me. I'm the guy with the hair. Yes. But even at this point, I cared a lot about making stuff that worked well. And it was really nice that people were actually using the stuff that I made. And, they appreciated the little usability touches. And I loved learning how to do that stuff better. So I was making stuff that worked and that worked well. People were using my stuff, and they were happy. There were no other developers to be mad at me. So what do you think? Could it be maintained? Heck no. No. I was a cowboy coder. Cowboy coding is an undisciplined approach to software development that gives programmers complete control over the development process. Because there was no one else who ever touched this stuff. So I was just doing whatever, just making it work and making it work well any way I could. And I was even doing stuff like directly editing the production database. Do not do this, folks. In all fairness, I only deleted the entire production database in the middle of the workday once.
Oh my God.
Okay, twice. The truth is, I didn't know a better way to do it. And you'll probably get fired if you do something like this. Thankfully, I didn't. Because no one else knew how to maintain my stuff. No, that's not why they didn't fire me. But there were no systems in place And not only did I not know a better way to do this stuff, I didn't even know how to find out how better to do this stuff. I didn't know a single other professional programmer. I had no one to talk to, no one to ask. You know, none of my bosses or anyone were developers. They were all network engineers and, you know, suits and stuff. So I was very curious. I was buying new books and stuff all the time, but they were all just like super deep technical books, right? They were all just how to do the code part. I didn't even know what anything about the craft of software development. And I have a CS degree. They didn't teach us any of that. They didn't teach us any of that. They taught us lots of theory, but nothing about architecture and process. That process and craft stuff is so important. So despite my curiosity, I was a cowboy coder churning out spaghetti code. Then something magical happened. I asked my boss if we could hire a second developer. And he said, yes, we can hire a second developer. So that's not my real boss. So we hired a second developer. And he was immediately hit by an SUV. But he's okay now. That's not a picture of him. I don't think anyone got a picture of it. But he was on his bike the week after we hired him, and he got hit by an SUV. His name was Miles, and yes, yes, no, his name's Miles, and remember this picture? Oh, he's the other guy in the picture. It's Miles, everybody. So who went to NDRB last week, right? Yeah, he runs NDRB. So he was the guy. So we hired him as the second developer, and he had that same curiosity that I did. We had a similar experience level. So we were both super young and had no idea what we were doing. This picture is a little more recent than that. There are some pictures of us when we first started working together on fretless.com, actually. But that's kind of a spoiler alert. So we were at the same experience level. It's not like one of us was wildly experienced at this stuff. But just having a second person there to talk to about this stuff and to get excited about this stuff with was just so dang helpful. We both got so much better so quickly. You know, he had heard about stuff that I hadn't heard about. I had heard about stuff that he hadn't heard about. You know, like, hey, have you heard about this test-driven development business? Ooh, test-driven development, that sounds neat. Let's learn about this. Ooh, here's this testing library. Here's this testing library. Hey, I hate JavaScript. Hey, JavaScript's not so bad. You should really try it more. That kind of stuff. Boy, he hated JavaScript when we first started working together. He doesn't love it now, but he likes it a lot better than he did. Huh? Oh, yeah, that was his first tweet. Yeah. He didn't make, yeah, right. So his very first tweet was about how much he hates JavaScript. So we could talk about this stuff all the time, and when we weren't distracting each other talking about music, but that helped a lot. And now every line of code I wrote was going to be read by someone else. Previously, no one else ever looked at my code. They just used the product, right? But now there was another developer on the team who had to understand everything I wrote. And I needed to understand everything he wrote. So some of those sloppy shortcuts that you use to just hit a deadline were not going to fly anymore because there was someone else who had to deal with your crap. Miles also happens to be really, really, really outgoing. So he found out about a local developer meetup and suggested that we go. So we went. And I never would have gone to that thing. I'm terrified of those situations. This kind of stuff, this is more performance than it is socialization. This is not like going to a room full of strangers and like introducing yourself. This is performance. This is different. I can handle this. Going to a meetup, that's terrifying to me. So I've gotten way better at it in no small part because I had someone to go with to these things. So Miles would just start a conversation with anybody, and then I could just kind of stand near him, and eventually they'd be like, so who's this freak? And then before you know it, I had a new friend. So there were technical talks at the meetups and stuff, but just as importantly, there were lots of other developers there, or even just a handful of other developers who we knew shared that same technical curiosity just by being there, right? They were at least curious enough to show up, even if they didn't know much yet. Because we all kind of had a similar level of experience in those early days. And within just a few months, Miles had taken over that particular meetup and runs it to this day, and it is in DRB, the one that some of you went to last week. So that was 10 years ago that we started going to that, I think. No, 11. So here's some actionable advice out of that lengthy story. Go to meetups. Indianapolis has tons of great tech meetups. indiehackers.org maintains a calendar of them. Many of them are recorded. There's a React-specific meetup. There's a JavaScript meetup that is so popular it has a waiting list every time. There's IndiePy if you like Python, IndieRB if you like Ruby. But every city has these things. There's some in Bloomington. Dana goes to one that's really, really small, the JavaScript meetup there, right? Code and Coffee. And you know, even if the technical talks are above your head, and some of them probably will be and some of them won't, just hanging around other people who do the job, I think, is incredibly valuable. And it's also not a bad move professionally. For several years, I think every single person Fretless hired was someone we met through meetups. You know, we got to know just about every Ruby developer in Indy through that. So, you know, that was our recruiting pool. So that's not a bad idea. Subscribe to newsletters. I subscribe to all of those on the left. They're all from the same company, Cooper Press. They're all free. Ruby Weekly, JavaScript Weekly, React Status. And even if you can't, Dana, that reminds me. Tyler McGinnis's 4-day React JS bootcamp. It's on YouTube. It's free. Yeah, find that link. We should add that to the webpage. So if my explanations of the basics of React don't click for you, this guy, he wrote React Router. And he has a 4-day free bootcamp that was he just did this in like April or May. So it's very up-to-date information too. And I've done some of his other tutorials. He's great. But I find out about these things by subscribing to these newsletters. And of course, I don't have time to read all of those every week. But I do scan the headlines. And inevitably, there's one or two things I want to open up in a tab and read later. But at the very least, it kind of gives me an idea of where things are headed. Like, as React 16 approached, I kept seeing links about the new context API, which kind of said to me, okay, this is something I need to pay attention to. Sooner or later, I need to find out how this thing works. Okay, everybody's talking about Vue.js now, V-U-E. That's probably something I should try to learn when I have the time. So just kind of keeping my finger on the pulse a little bit by subscribing to these newsletters. What else can you do to power up your technical capability? Teach. You don't need to already be a senior developer before you can teach someone or give a talk at a meetup, or even at a conference. Junior developers give talks at conferences all the time. Talk about how you learned something. Talk about what you did to get through a boot camp, all that kind of stuff. Those are all good. And incidentally, meetups are great practice for conferences. I gave this talk at IndieRB before I gave it at any conferences. But anyway, you already know a little more about something than at least someone. So you can do that. You're all graduates from a coding boot camp now. Help out some other boot camp students if you run across them. If you've got a friend who's learning React, maybe at the very least you can point them to the website or something and like show them how that works. Or show someone who's interested in learning React how Chattering works and show them like, look, this is what you can do. A trick I have used on numerous occasions when I wanted to learn a new technology, I promised someone else I would teach it to them. That is how I learned React. I learned React by promising that I would teach a multi-week React bootcamp. The first time I taught this, I didn't even know React yet. I had a few months to prepare. So that'll scare you into learning something pretty gosh darn well pretty quickly. I don't necessarily recommend that exact trick, though it has worked for me a few times. That's how I learned AngularJS as well. Back when it was AngularJS, it's just Angular now, and it's totally different. But the first time I learned that, I promised that I would teach a boot camp. So yeah, that scares you to death, and you just find yourself studying at all hours when you know you have to stand up in front of somebody and not only code live, but be prepared for their questions, because that's at least as hard as the other thing. That's also how I learned Node. I committed to teaching those things. So anyway, Be technically curious, tackle problems without giving up, and produce solutions that less experienced folks can use, maintain, and learn from. Talk to other developers, subscribe to newsletters, and pretty soon you'll be saying, I am technical capability, and so can you. So that's technical capability, the first circle. The others aren't quite as long. So a person with leadership skills knows how to develop and follow a sense of purpose in themselves and in others. How to develop and follow a sense of purpose in themselves and in others. They're willing to point out, own, and fix things that are broken in their organization and in their own career tracks. Okay, great. So we've defined it. But Uncle Dave, how do I leadership? This may feel like another one of those things that some people just seem like natural leaders, but you can absolutely develop this and get better at it. So how the heck do you even start? Well, you could read some of the approximately 112 billion leadership books out there. A couple of these are really, really good, by the way. Radical Candor, the second one from the right there, that is a fantastic book. Start With Why is good. The 7 Habits is a classic for a reason. What's that? Oh, yes, yeah. It's a good one. Of highly effective people. Covey. So some of those books are really good. You can listen to podcasts. Simple Leadership is a really good one. Manager Tools is excellent, but it does tend to discuss management specifically, not just leadership generally. But the same folks have one called Career Tools, which I cannot recommend enough. The number of topics that they cover is incredible. Like every professional scenario you can imagine, they have a podcast about how to deal with that thing. And it's full of great actionable advice. They have a half-hour-long podcast on how to introduce yourself to someone. That may seem excessive, but really, it's good. And I think they have a separate one on handshakes. You can listen to them on 1.5 speed, no problem. But it's like, okay, suppose you didn't hear them when they said their name. Do you ask them to repeat it? What if you introduce yourself and then they don't say anything back? I hate this. Like, hi, I'm Davey. Hi. So how do you handle that? Not going to tell you. You should listen to the podcast. All right. They have one called Creating a Presentation, but I only got 8 seconds into that, so maybe one of these days I'll learn how to do it. No, they have 4 or 5 on creating presentations. So there's this one. There's one on body language. There's one on movement. Body language and movement, not the same thing. Movement, that's this kind of stuff. Body language, that's this kind of stuff. How to use your voice, etc. I've never really had a problem with that one. The number of topics they cover is just insane. So really, the Career Tools podcast is fantastic stuff. Talk about this stuff with other people. Consuming the information is great, but talking about it with others is really, really useful. Tell stories. Hear other people's stories. Learn from other people's successes and their mistakes. Maybe you can find a buddy locally who wants to listen to the same podcast that you do, like Miles was for me. Maybe a mentor, maybe just someone you can talk to over coffee sometime. If you can't find someone locally or you're just terrified socially, join a Slack group, the Indie Hackers Slack group. You can get there on indiehackers.org, and there's a link to how to invite yourself to the Slack channel. It's great, Slack organization, I should say, because there are lots of channels. There's just the general channel. There's the Women in Tech channel. There's an Engineering Managers channel, all that stuff. It's great, super welcoming community. Talk about experiences, trade stories, learn from other people's successes and failures. And it's worth pointing out that this doesn't necessarily mean becoming the Harvard Business School ideal leader. You don't have to be the most extroverted person in the world in order to lead. One of the quietest people I know is an incredible leader. Dave Jones, who some of you met at the meetup last week. Super quiet guy, but he has that sense of purpose, and it is super contagious. He does the same thing I do. He works at Fretless, so he often joins existing development teams for a few months at a time, and those teams just can't help but get better because he's there, because he just rubs off on people in that way. So do this stuff, listen to some podcasts, talk to other people, share stories, and pretty soon you'll be saying, I am leadership, and so can you. So finally, community. This definition is really long. A person with community skills has a sense of being part of a larger whole, a desire to contribute, and a sense that the other people, their coworkers, users, clients, etc., are not simply the supporting cast of their movie, but are fully realized individuals. So, person with community skills has a sense of being part of a larger whole, a desire to contribute, and a sense that others are fully realized individuals, not just supporting characters in your story. So it helps not to be a psychopath. Community sounds a lot like empathy. And I know a tech leader in Indianapolis, a manager who hires a lot of people, who values empathy above all else. That's the main thing he wants to find out when he interviews somebody. Is this person capable of getting along with others? Super important. And it's one of the harder things to develop if it doesn't come naturally to you. I do know someone who overcame this, so I know it can be done. Otherwise, I probably would not believe it if I didn't know this person. But he was someone who his entire life had just coasted on technical capability because he could teach himself a new skill terrifyingly fast. And when he became a manager somewhere, his team's numbers went up because he was just doing all the work himself and he was that good. But that's not how you build a team. And he got told for basically the first time in his life at age 30 that he wasn't doing a good job because he was not leading. And his issue was he did not have that sense. It was kind of all about him. But he learned through some training and through hard work and deciding that this was important to him, how to genuinely become that kind of person. And now, he's kind of embarrassed at the way he used to be. And now has a very strong opinion that being the way he used to be just isn't acceptable. You have to be like this. So it can be learned if you're not a natural at treating other people like they matter. I can even recommend some books. So writing code that other people can understand and learn from, giving thoughtful code reviews. Code reviews are a big part of life as a professional developer. Being receptive to other people's reviews of your code, helping others grow, taking direction, accepting feedback. All of that stuff is part of being part of something that is bigger than yourself. A desire to contribute. So maybe that means making open source contributions. Maybe it means participating in things like the Indie Civic Hack or volunteering at a school for the hour of code. It doesn't have to mean those specific things, but those are great opportunities to get involved and start to feel like part of something bigger if you can't find that at your school or your work. So get involved in this kind of stuff. Learn to give people the same kind of benefit of the doubt that you give yourself. Recognize your own mistakes and grow. And pretty soon you'll be saying, I am community, and so can you. So here again is the diagram. And I'll be frank, most people never reach the senior level of all three categories. Very few people even want to. At Fretless, we follow the same measure as Frontside, who came up with this model. And that is that if someone has reached the senior level of technical capability, because there's just no way around that, and at least one of the other two traits, and is at least mid-level in the third, we consider them a senior developer. So high technical capability and high community skills, senior developer, if you're not a complete leadership disaster. Technical capability and leadership and not a psychopath, great, senior developer. If you do get all three, I don't know, you're mega senior or something. What if you have both leadership and community skills, but your technical capability is a little behind right now? That's where a lot of career switchers are. And some of the boot camps that I used to teach were really aimed at that crowd. Dana is a career switcher. She's been a professional person for longer than she has been a professional developer. She used to do something completely different. But that experience brought her to a super high level on the community and leadership side. And speaking for myself, I'd way rather work with someone who's great at those and on the technical side at least has that curiosity, has that tendency not to give up, and who is at least interested in developing solutions that other people can learn from, even if they don't know how to do that yet. Because it is at least as hard to develop those other two things as it is to develop technical capability. I think it's harder. If you do something else for a while, don't think that experience is a waste, even if it's non-technical. all of that is super important to becoming a truly good developer. We have now, on several occasions, hired bootcamp graduates and folks like that who were high on those other two levels, but were kind of new on the technical side, and it's always worked out well. And we're a tiny company, by the way. Half of the development team is in the room at the moment, but we've had great luck doing that. There are a couple people who've come and gone. So if you're technically curious, you don't give up, and you're at least convinced that you ought to strive to write maintainable code, you can learn the technical details. It's much harder to learn to play nice with others, though, but it can be done. If you take nothing else from this talk, let it be this. Technical capability is not enough to qualify as a senior in our world. No one with mad technical skills and necessarily attitude wants to hear that, but it's reality. We just can't deliver and maintain the kind of products that we need to based on technical chops alone. So at Fretless, we work with our employees to identify the areas in which they're interested in improving, and we try to provide an environment in which they're able to do so. And hopefully you're able to do the same. Make a plan to grow in these areas, and soon enough, you'll be saying, I am senior, and so can you. Once again, I'm that guy.